What's up, everybody? Welcome to another special IG Live. In a moment, I'm going to invite he's our Caribbean correspondent at Latino Rebels, Carlos Edill Berríos Polanco. Probably a lot of you know him from his, reporting in Puerto Rico, written and video reporting. He's been doing it in Puerto Rico, just killing it. He pitched us an idea like in May. He's going to get into it more, but pitched us an idea to go to Atlanta to cover the Stop Cop City movement and the week of action that's, I think, just wrapping up or just wrapped up. I'm going to bring him on here to talk about what's been going on. We were going to do one during the 4th of July break. Futuro's offices were closed for 4 days. But I thought, better to have him on first day back and give us an update and let us know what's going on. Really interested to see what's been going on. I mean, if a lot of you don't know, there's, well, here he is. I'll let him describe it, explain everything to you. What's up, Los?
What's up, Hector? How are you doing?
Good, man. You back in Puerto Rico?
Yep. I got in at 5 a.m. on Monday morning.
Nice.
Yeah, my flight was delayed a bunch, but we got there.
I mean, at least you didn't get, we were also worried. I know you and I were worried about, some kind of, police kind of, let's call it police overreach, especially towards journalists down there. You've experienced your fair share of that with police in Puerto Rico. But let everybody know, like, what's, for people who don't know, obviously people are tuning in because it's Cop City and they know what Cop City is. But let's say for people who don't know what Cop City is or the Stop Cop City movement, give us a summary of it.
So Cop City is the nickname of a police training facility that is proposed to be built in the South River Forest in Atlanta, which some have called one of Atlanta's four lungs. It was proposed way back in a couple of years ago, but it was originally slated to begin construction last year, if I'm remembering correctly. And obviously because they need to cut down a bunch of forests, and because the establishment of this police training facility would mean further militarization of police in Atlanta and beyond, because it's likely that it will be used to train cops around the United States. People have been opposing it since it was first proposed. Originally, activists were camping in the South River Forest, which has been given a bunch of names after. It's originally called the Weelaunee Forest by the indigenous tribes of the area. It's also called the Weelaunee People's Park. Activists were originally camping in the forest since 2021, 2022.
It's the largest urban forest. I don't know if you mentioned this. It's the largest urban forest in the United States, right? Like, it's the largest forest within like a city environment in the United States.
I believe
city limits.
So yeah,
right. And the cops are gonna be like training, like, kind of. I mean, it's cops, so if it was army, they would say urban warfare. But I mean, that's really what the police were kind of crowd control, right? Mob control.
It is an urban warfare training facility. Like,
got to bear with him. He's in Puerto Rico, and other than
stuff like that,
the power outages going on. Say it again. You kind of froze on us. Say that whole thing again.
Sorry, my internet's being a little finicky.
Yeah, I was explaining that. Don't worry.
It's essentially an urban warfare training facility, right there. One of the plans is to build a mini city where police can practice riot suppression techniques, and this is something that we're not only seeing in Atlanta, right, but we're seeing all around the United States in different training facilities. I know that there are some in Texas. Some others are proposed. Sorry. Some others have been proposed throughout the states. I know that there was one in Chicago, I believe, called Cop Academy that was built, even though it faced fierce opposition from activists. But it is essentially training the police in urban warfare techniques. It also includes a firing range, some stuff for the fire department. stuff like that. But activists opposed to the destruction of the forest and to the further militarization of police had been camping in the Woolani People's Park since 2021, 2022. I believe some people had been camping, I believe, since 2020, but it really ramped up in 2021. And they had essentially built like many communities in there. There were tree houses. There was this giant spot, or this pretty big spot called the living room, where people could gather in essentially the living room of the forest, stuff like that. And you know, they had faced opposition from police, and because some of these activists were incredibly opposed to the building of this police training center, they had sabotaged vehicles. They had sabotaged police vehicles, construction vehicles, stuff like that. And then that kind of all came to a head in January 18th, when a variety of Georgia security forces raided the forest and killed activist Manuel Paez Terran, also known as Tortuguita. Initially, they were saying, the police or the security forces were saying that Tortuguita shot at them first. Then it later came out through an independent autopsy that Tortuguita was likely had their hands up and was likely sitting cross-legged. They were shot 57 times. And that happened on the 18th. Then during the last week of action, the 5th week of action, there was the South River Music Festival, which was essentially like a music festival in the forest. A lot of artists performed. Zach Fox performed. I believe Faye Webster performed. And during the concert, a large group of individuals clad in black bloc attacked part of the building construction zone in a power line cut. If you've seen, there's video out there of police running to close the gates as activists were coming in. And some people claim that in response to that action by activists in black bloc, police or security forces decided to raid the South River Music Festival, where they arrested, I believe, 23 activists. I don't know if I'm getting that number quite right. And these activists were later charged with domestic terrorism charges. And after that, police essentially forced everyone to evacuate from the Woolani People's Park. And since then, they have not had kind of a sustained presence in the park, the activists, I mean. So this was the first week of action without them being kind of in control, more or less, of the forest. So it was a very, very interesting thing to experience. A lot of the events happened at Brownwood Park, which is it has a kind of foresty vibe, but it is by no means close to the size of the Woolani People's Park. And there were some other actions at Gresham Park. There was another action a small action at Woodruff Park, right? And essentially, what this week, to me,
yeah, well, I was gonna just to preface that. I mean, I was just right before I added you. I was gonna say that you had pitched us this idea to you're normally our Caribbean correspondent. You wanted to go to Atlanta to cover the Stop Cop City movement. Explain how that happened. How about how you met these activists in Puerto Rico?
Yes, there was a group of activists that had come to Puerto Rico, and among them was one activist who had been present at some Stop Cop City events. And when we got to talking, that activist was like, "Hey, have you heard about Cop City?" And I'm like, "Of course I've heard about Cop City, right? It's one of the defining environmental fights of at least my time as an adult, right?" And we got to talking. I continued conversing with that activist until I eventually pitched to Latino Rebels, going up there and reporting during this 6 week of action. That's kind of how I went in, having already reported on kind of environmental struggles here.
Not kind of.
Puerto
I
Rico.
mean, you've been not even kind of, right? I mean, you among the many things that you cover in Puerto Rico is the beach privatization, land privatization, the encroachment of private development aided by governmental forces or private, just private public kind of partnership to privatize land and to block access to public beaches. yada yada yada. Especially in
Mhm.
Aguadilla, where things have
Yeah.
turned particularly violent, right? Active beach activists, environmental activists shot on the beach, right? And
Mhm.
so that's kind of where, typically when your Caribbean correspondent says, "I want to go to Atlanta," you're like, "Well, why?" I mean,
Yeah.
we saw right away, right, that was like a natural thing for you to do.
I mean, the thing is, right, these environmental struggles, at least in my thinking, are going to become kind of a defining thing in the 21st century, right? As human caused climate change continues heavily impacting areas across the planet, these environmental struggles by eco activists are going to become not only more prevalent, but also will garner greater widespread support. And I thought it was important to kind of start making some links in environmental struggles across the United States and the Caribbean.
So, I mean, explain what what this recent week of action that you went to Atlanta to cover. What was it about? What was planned? How did it develop?
So essentially, since this is the first week of action where they didn't have kind of control of the forest, a lot of the actions were planned at Brownwood Park. And essentially, honestly, it was kind of a little bit of a summer camp vibe. Like there were a lot of events that were like mainly around connecting with other
Activist summer
activists.
camp.
Yeah, essentially, yeah, like an eco activist summer camp. That first day, the Saturday, the 24th, if I'm remembering correctly, there was kind of like an all-day barbecue. There were some people dancing. There were some lectures on like police abolitionism, the why it's important to protect the environment, stuff like that. And near 8:30, when there was supposed to be a vigil for Tortuguita, where um, Tortuguita's mother, Bautista Ran, and
Who's very
Tortuguita's
involved.
sip.
I mean, she's very involved in the movement, right? She's kind of like a spokesperson now, right? She seems
Yeah,
like it.
yeah,
The video I seen that you sent me, she's everywhere.
yeah, no, essentially since her child was killed, she's become a little bit of a I'm trying to find the right words because leader isn't really the right word, but a
I
person
think it's
that
like
people
celebre, what it cause celebre, right? Like somebody
something like that, like
who's known.
yeah,
Their name is
yeah,
known and they're known.
like a lot of people looked at her for advice. Like when she first arrived at the park, a lot of people were giving her hugs, being
She kind of has like a
it's been so
mother of the movement
exactly
vibe
yeah
too, right? Because
mother. That's
everybody's young.
actually that yeah that's actually almost verbatim how someone described to her to me, kind of like quote unquote mother of the movement, that first day, right? And right when this vigil was about to start, about 30 Atlanta Police Department cops rolled through the park, kind of screaming, just like in like a line, screaming that the park closes at 11. Naturally, a lot of people took it as kind of an intimidation tactic and very disrespectful when this vigil was literally about to start. So they walked through Brownwood Park, and then came out the other end. They were parked at a local, I believe it was a high school parking lot, where there were about 20-ish more cops waiting there. And then afterwards, the vigil began. People hugged, people cried. It was very clear that it was kind of like a healing moment for people since the last week of action, right? When the raid on the South River Music Festival occurred. Um, and afterwards, that was kind of the end of the first day. And I was expecting to see a little bit more police repression because of what we had seen before, but the rest of the week was kind of very chill from what I was speaking. There were a couple of direct actions, but like compared to the last week, it was very chill. There were a couple of direct actions, one at Cadence Bank, where an activist was arrested and I believe two others were detained. There was a direct action at Home Depot where they arrested a 76-year-old activist that many called a movement elder, and another activist was arrested. Um, so it's kind of right, there is still very much the police repression going on. Thankfully, these activists who were peacefully protesting were not charged with domestic terrorism charges. And I believe, when you look at my notes, I believe so far 42 activists have been charged with domestic terrorism.
And and that's a parallel to what's going on in Puerto Rico, right? I
Mm,
mean, domestic terrorism is like the new code word for arresting protesters.
yeah, thankfully in Puerto Rico, from what we've seen so far, there haven't been any domestic terrorism charges, but that is certainly a kind of framing that has been used against these environmental protesters in Puerto Rico. And I mean, it's a framing of environmental protesters that goes back decades, right? I remember I was a child when this happened, but in the early 2000s, the Green Scare, a lot of those activists who were protecting trees were being labeled or terrorists, domestic
Greenpeace.
terrorists. Yeah, a lot of Greenpeace and like other like eco activists, eco anarchist types were labeled as domestic terrorists, right? Because in kind of like a post 9/11 United States, that's the label that will like instantly demonize a
Right.
movement, right? Thankfully, a lot of these activists, right, there is absolutely a fear of police repression. Don't get me wrong, right? I heard, oh, my AirPods died. Sorry about that. No, can you hear me? Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for don't get me wrong, there's absolutely the fear of police repression among a lot of these activists. Like one activist told me that a lot of the forest defenders, or some of the forest defenders that they knew, were specifically not in town during this week of action because of police repression, but others are very much like cognizant of this police repression as something that could happen to them, but they still remain committed to this movement. Right, earlier this year, between the 5th and 6th week of action, there was a raid on free members of the Atlanta Solidarity Fund. They were charged RICO charges. Then the Atlanta Solidarity Fund was down. During the week of action, it started back up again. But right, there is still very much that fear that anyone who's arrested could be charged with domestic terrorism for what is essentially kind of things that should not be labeled as domestic terrorism. Like a lot of the warrants during the South River Music Festival, kind of essentially were saying this person was wearing black, this person had mud on their shoes, this person was in the forest, that kind of stuff. That was then used as a justification to charge them for domestic terrorism. Some people, some activists and scholars believe that this is an intimidation tactic on the part of Georgia law enforcement and Georgia
Because
government.
you don't have to be charged. Obviously, people are going to say, well, they're not going to get convicted of these stuff. It's going to get thrown out in court. But
Mm-hmm.
just to have a record of
Yeah.
of an arrest, of a charge, now they have your name, right? Now they fingerprinted you. Now you've been booked, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's really what it is to keep tabs on people, right? And the activists are no fools. They know they're not going to get convicted of domestic terrorism, but now they're on police radar.
Well, I mean, don't I do not believe, right, in my personal capacity, that any of these activists are likely to get convicted of domestic terrorism charges. But again, if
If
they
one of them,
were,
right? If
yeah,
one of them
if
gets
one of
convicted, it sends
them,
a
that's
chill.
a very, very bad precedent for the rest of them, right? And there is, right, during the week of action, I should have written this down, but one of the prosecutors, I believe, recused herself from the charges being charged on these activists, right? And the thing is, right, like you said, these charges, even if they don't get charged, will follow them forever, right? There is one activist, Victor Puertas, who was arrested during the South River Music Festival, who is currently in ICE custody. We went there on Thursday last week. They're being held at a core civic facility. Because, and like their legal standing in the United States was not under any threat until they were arrested with these domestic terrorism charges, right? And this is an activist who had been present at other kind of environmental struggles. I believe
Is
they
this
were
the guy
present.
who you guys were visiting
Mm-hmm.
and you guys ran into Mayor Dickens? I
Yeah, yeah.
mean, explain that. That was wild. That video you
So
sent me was wild.
yeah, so actually I was in the middle of interviewing someone who was on the bus when they got up and was like, "Hey, was that Andrew Dickens behind us?" And then they asked the bus to turn around to then confront Mayor Andrew Dickens and other politicians who were there. Andrew Dickens was kind of
His name's
very quick.
Andre, right?
Yeah,
Andre Dickens.
yeah. Sorry.
And this was like a faith coalition, a faith group,
Yeah,
kind
yeah.
of.
The Faith Coalition went to confront them. They were because in this facility they're not really they're only people in this ICE facility are only allowed one guest per week, I believe. But if they're a member of the clergy, they can kind of come in every other day, which is why a lot of these people in the Faith Coalition have been visiting Victor fairly constantly. But we were with a group of the Faith Coalition.
With
Turned around.
Tortuguita's mom,
Yeah,
right? Who was there too.
mom was also there. Other people involved in kind of immigrant support, immigration stuff were also present. So we stop at this fire station, try to confront Andre Dickens. He's very quickly escorted out of the premises. And then the people there are Atlanta City Council members. Berkis kind of walked to Matt Westmoreland and began to talk to him. And he was asked by Matthew Johnson, a part of the Faith Coalition, if he would condemn the murder of Tortuguita. Said no. Then Tortuguita, Belkis, my apologies, continued talking with him, just saying, like, my son is not right. What they're trying to say my son did, or my child did, sorry, is not what happened. That was not her child. Then she talked to another member of the Atlanta City Council.
Well, there was I heard some accusations in those videos. I mean, obviously those activists know everybody on the city council, and there was like an accusation, I guess, against Westmoreland that
yes,
somebody in his family is connected with the sale of
his alleged. His best friend is apparently a lobbyist for the Atlanta Police Foundation, which is part of the list of groups pushing for the cop city to be built, right? And there was another council member who very quickly walked off, who were activists were saying, you're also part of, why did you vote yes? Or you clearly have a connection to something else, right? So it's kind of seeing how these city council people have outside connections to Cop City where it would either socially or financially benefit them to get this built, right? And what was kind of very, shocking is not the right word, but was kind of a little not great, I'll say that. Later is that the Atlanta City Council on Instagram, I believe, put a post of Matt Westmoreland and another city council member hugging Belkis, kind of saying that they were humanitarians. And obviously everybody was extremely mad at that, especially when Westmoreland refused to condemn the murder of Tortuguita, kind of using Belkis, who is this mother that is grieving her child continuously and has become part of the movement to stop Cop City and defend the Atlanta forest, continuing what her child was doing to further like their political journey, to further their kind of like political power by saying this is a humanitarian Atlanta City Council. So obviously
one of the activists,
yeah,
one of the activists were shouting at him saying, "You're not going to get your photo op. You're not." And he sounds like he got it. Wow, that's terrible.
Yeah. That was.
How was the weekend? I mean, that's where we last left you late last week. I mean, how was the weekend?
It was actually very chill. There was that the Home Depot arrest. The two arrests were the first day. And then there was another South River Music Festival held in a different spot. That I thought, I was worried going in. I was like, this is kind of a known quantity to police. Are we going to get raided as well? Thankfully, nothing happened, and everyone seemed to have a very chill time during that festival. I was there for a couple hours. It was good music. I didn't know any of them because I'm not from Atlanta, but the bands were pretty good. And then that Sunday, Belkis spoke at a church because Belkis has a master's degree in theology.
Wow.
Yeah, so she spoke at this church. There was kind of a back and forth with a minister there, and then
What
that was
background is she is
she's
her was her in
she's a
Tortuguita?
Christian. She's a Christian.
But
I don't know exactly
nationality, like
what.
nationality?
Oh, they are from. Wow, I should know this.
I thought
They
it
are
was
from
like
Bolivia.
Peru, Bolivia.
No, no, no. I believe it's from Bolivia. They currently live in Panama, but I should really know this. Or no, or
Okay,
Venezuelan. Venezuelan. My
a
apologies.
Venezuelan.
Yeah.
Okay. And what was the other thing? Yeah, I mean, the other thing about Cop City is that it's so symbolic. It is, just saying you're going to build this police training facility in Atlanta, which is like, the great black
Hmm.
metropolis, black excellence, right? It's, to say you're going to put one in Chicago. I mean, why don't you put one in Montana, right? Why don't you put one in Idaho? You put it there as a part of, and
No,
I
I
think
mean
that's
there are Cop City or Comp City related facilities proposed throughout the United States. During the week of action, they learned about one that was being proposed in Ohio, right? And these facilities, right, the more of them that get built, the more that security forces in different states or even at a federal level will kind of see this as the way to go, right? To have one of these facilities in every state, or to expand them across, right? This is about training police, giving them more equipment, militarizing them further, and training them in kind of riot
mano
control.
dura tactics. I mean,
Yeah,
as like in Latino parlance, right? Mano dura tactics, right?
yeah,
Like you see it in Mexico, right? And it's the troubling thing is that it's popular, right? It is popular, right? What AMLO's doing in or saying to do, right? When he came in Mexico, saying, hugs not bullets, right?
mm,
That was his policy, and now it's let's lock up everybody we can, and I know a lot of Mexicans support that. Same thing in El Salvador, where Bukele is, he's very popular
yeah.
for his mano dura tactics. Same thing just happened in Honduras, right? Where it's like, let's throw out civil rights, let's throw out habeas corpus, let's let the cops do their thing.
Right, and
And
that's like the thing. While I was right, I didn't have a car in Atlanta, so I took a lot of Ubers, and a lot of the Uber drivers that I rode with were pro Cop City. Like even some people that
wow,
were talking to me in the street were pro Cop City, and a lot of activists acknowledge that they're a minority in the city that are against Cop City, right? But I think some of them see that as possibly shifting, right? But yeah, it is a thing that is kind of seen as a popular thing throughout kind of everywhere in the world, right? Because if you frame it in a way that is essentially like this will always reduce crime, more police will
law and
always
order.
reduce crime, right? It is a thing that people who I don't know how to frame this, but people who have kind of that vision of the world entrenched in them, where more police equals more security, they will always support this type of thing, right? It's the thing of like, if you
Defund
believe that
defund the police isn't popular, right? Most people
yeah,
think that police need more funding. And that's
exactly,
tough, like,
more
because we're the pro democracy side. So, like, how do we argue against that, right? I mean,
mm,
like, when most people want something and we're saying, no, this is actually, giving police greater authority and, basically flirting with a police state, right? Which is what we're
mm-hmm.
flirting with here, right? Letting police be above the law. That's not good for democracy. But when, like, most people want it, like, yeah, the activists do seem like extreme lefties, right?
Mm-hmm. And I mean, one thing that was very noticeable there is how kind of police see journalists as being with the
Right.
protesters during an event. Well, actually multiple events. There was a Cadence Bank protest where police were saying that they were going to arrest journalists who were on the steps of the bank trying to get like pictures or video of the activists, right? They Multiple journalists that day were threatened with arrest, and at the vigil for the two people arrested at the Home Depot protest that was going to be held, in the parking lot of the Fulton County Jail, police very quickly arrived and were like, you can't do it in this parking lot, and tried like pushing people out, wouldn't tell people what ordinance that they were breaking being in that parking lot. And then when people were trying to get their cars out of that lot, they were like, you can go one by one. And obviously, like, journalists and activists were being like, so why can they only go one by one? What ordinance they breaking? Refuse to talk. And then when I was walking, taking pictures, like talking to activists who were getting their cars, one journalist had their car in the lot, as well. And when we were trying to convince the police to let us pass, they were continually saying we were with the protesters, that what they were saying also applied to us, and because we were with them. And I was like, well, if that's how it works, then you were also walking with us, so you're with them as well. And they were like, no, but you were with them. I'm like, so what does that mean?
Right.
Like, what is that framing? And right, obviously they just kept repeating, you were with them. I'm just like, no, we were doing our jobs. Which, like, the thing that, like, the pool of journalists later were talking about, like, if we were with the activists, we wouldn't have like our faces uncovered, ID badges, things clearly identifying as press. So it's kind of a very bad kind of both like social and legal precedent being set in the fight against the Cop City, or in the police repression. We're seeing kind of a legal and social precedent where journalists doing their jobs are seen as being part of this activist force. And like the truth is, regardless whether an activist is for or against Cop City, if they're just taking pictures, that shouldn't mean that they're with anyone, right? Like,
Yeah.
if I'm taking pictures of something that I don't agree with, that doesn't mean I'm with them. That means I'm doing my job for Latino Rebels. And it's kind of a dangerous precedent that we're seeing, and have been seeing for a while in the United States, right? During the summer of 2020, during the George Floyd uprising, we saw a lot of journalists getting arrested or attacked for doing their jobs, right? I've been attacked for doing my job a couple of times. So it's kind of a bad precedent that's being set, kind of at every interaction happening.
Yeah, and I don't want to sound like that. Like an anti-Trump. I'm anti-Trump, but I'm not an anti-Trumper. You know what I mean? I'm not anything. I'm just, But it did start with Trump, right?
Mm-hmm.
Trump is, when the president of the United States is saying like journalists are bad. Like, that's when journalists became like a bad word, right?
Mm-hmm.
With everybody, right? Because like he had everybody, from CNN, MSNBC, anybody who wasn't Fox was the bad guys. Fox was already the bad guys for everybody on the left. So now nobody trusts anybody, right? And it's dangerous when police are just people. They watch Fox News. They listen. A lot of them voted for Trump, right? Because he's for letting the cops do whatever they want. So if you're a cop, it's in your interest to vote for somebody like that. But it's not in the interest of democracy. But yeah, I mean, I was in a group of people the other day, and they were like, yeah, journalists, like, nobody trusts journalists, right? And I was like, like, I didn't say anything, right? I'm so glad they didn't ask me what I did. They shouldn't assume, right, that I'm in journalism. But like, yeah, it is that fear. And like, that's one of the things when we were sending you to Cop City, like, that was, you sent me your information, like, hey, just in case something happens, here's my information. And
I was making the joke to every journalist that I was working with, hey, if I get arrested, just keep saying Puerto Rico is a part of the United States.
Yeah, exactly. And it's sad, like, it's 4th of July weekend, right? And here you are, a journalist, afraid that you might get arrested by the police, right? Thankfully, it didn't happen, right? To their credit, you got to give police credit when they do something right, and they didn't arrest. It wasn't a bloodbath. It was no journalists were arrested.
And I mean, right, I was worried about my safety, right? But I think I don't want to like take away from like the threat against activists, because the threat that they face is greater, right? I have some protections because of my affiliation with Latino Rebels and my press badge, but I think it is kind of a wholehearted attack on this kind of like eco-activism that we're seeing with the way that right? There were times where I was expecting everyone who was elected in an activist circle to get arrested, and thankfully that didn't happen. But it is kind of a bad precedent that's being set here if people can get arrested for peacefully protesting for things that like do not merit the charges that they're being arrested with. And I kind of, for many, I think that has kind of cemented the fight against Cop City, but also scared some people away, right? But one thing I did want to mention, right, is that there were several kind of more direct actions throughout the week, right? There were the marches, the banner, the holding the banners and screaming at different places, but there were also kind of several direct attacks on the funders and the people kind of pushing for Cop City throughout the week, that many people associate with Cop City, right? During, let me see my notes. The July 1st, free police vehicles were vandalized and 8 police motorcycles were burned. July 1st in California, multiple Bank of America buildings and ATMs were vandalized. And then there's a couple of more things like this in New Orleans, and these are all in solidarity with Stop Cop City. At least the free police vehicles vandalized, the 8 motorcycles burned. That was reported by mainstream news, and then politicians and some activists are making the connection to Stop Cop City, likely because it's like the cause of the moment, right? There was a press conference earlier held by Andre Dickens, sorry, where he was very clearly linking the vandalism of these police vehicles and these motorcycles to the Defend the Atlanta Forest and Stop Cop City movement. But there were other actions across the United States in solidarity with Cop City. This vandalizing Bank of America buildings and ATMs in California, who is helping push Stop Cop City. On the homes of Brassfield and Gorey executives were vandalized, who is also pushing, or part of the group of organizations that are pushing Stop Cop City or contracting under it. On July 4th, reportedly 2 Brent Scarborough, which is one of the contractors, machines were torched during broad daylight. So there's still very much a lot of these more direct actions going on. And I like specifically don't want to say violent, because these are very specific attack against property, not people. Even though politicians are very much framing it as acts of violence, treating property as if they were attacks on people.
Well, yeah, some people treat property, give property more rights than people, right? And like, it's scary, you know, as somebody from Chicago. I mean, we saw this 100 years ago, right? In the late 1800s, with like activists bombing things. Nobody's getting hurt, but then the police, you know, just vandalism scares people, or just angers people, right? Don't damage public private property, and it gives, you know, it's a ratcheting up of things, right? Like we've been talking about this in Puerto Rico, like things are ratcheting up slowly but surely, and it's only going to take somebody on some side. You know, I hate to say this, but I mean it's hopefully doesn't go there. But you know, it's a ratcheting up, man, and it's somebody's gonna say, you know, give the cops whatever they want to stop these bombings of ATMs.
Yeah,
right?
actually,
They'd rather have the cops have full authority to stop people vandalizing ATMs. You know what I mean?
yeah, no, actually, during the press conference, let me see, I had something about that written down. Oh, don't tell me oh yeah, I did. So during the press conference, according to the Atlanta Community Press Collective, who is doing kind of historic work on covering the Stop Cop City movement and Defend the Atlanta Forest movement, they were kind of like live tweeting the conference, and Dickens said, whatever stops the violence is whatever I'm in favor of. When asked like, what are you doing to or what do you think is going to stop this? And like, kind of, to me, that is kind of setting the stage for more ratchet, just like what you were saying, ratcheting up anything to stop this violence against property, kind of setting the stage for that. And also at the same time, Dickens said that criminals are hiding in the midst of the peaceful protesters, kind of conflating the people who are doing these direct actions with peaceful protesters. And you know that thing that happens where if you just say that there's a few criminals in a group of peaceful protesters, then they can't
Or
differentiate
like with
anybody
the
on site.
migrants, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like with the migrants. Everybody knows it's not thousands of narcos coming across the border and terrorists coming across the border. They know maybe there's like, 1, 2 in 1,000, 10,000, right? 100,000. But then if you say, oh, there's some bad guys in there, then
Mm-hmm.
then it gives CBP Border Patrol
Mm-hmm.
license to knock everybody on the head because there might be a few bad apples.
Yeah, because essentially, right, if you paint one group with this broad brush where anybody in the group could be this, I believe it was the APD director who said professional anarchists, with this brush of professional anarchists. It could be anyone, right? And during the week of action, there was a screening of the film Riotsville, USA, which if you haven't seen it, it's very great. I'm telling you, Hector, and everybody watching as well. It's a very good movie. That was
What is it
about kind of,
on?
I'm not sure. I should check that. I think because they had contact with the director, so I think the director just kind of gave it directly to them. But it was a very good film. I watched it while editing some pictures that will probably go up sometime this week, hopefully. But it's about a similar situation where police built this urban warfare training facility, and we're painting it, and this was during the civil rights movement, and we're painting it as kind of like anybody in this group of peaceful protesters could suddenly turn violent. And once you kind of inculcate that mindset into a group of people whose job it is to be kind of the arbiters of violence, that will likely lead to them using violence against anybody that they think could be a potential threat. And if anybody could be a potential threat, that means that everybody is a threat or could be a threat, right? So we're kind of seeing, we're seeing a repeat, not even a repeat, like this has just been things that have been going on for decades now that are kind of gaining new forms, or being brought into the 21st century. And one of the things that I was asking a lot of activists while I was there was how Cop City, the facility, the buildings, are the future of policing in the way that they're going to be used to train Georgia law enforcement, and how, because of Georgia has this kind of partnership with the IDF, where IDF soldiers and police get trained in Georgia, and Georgia gets the exchange program.
You mean the Israeli Defense Forces?
Yeah. How the buildings, the facilities, the future of
and
policing.
Their IDF is not the gentlest police force on the planet.
Yeah. How the buildings and the facility is the future of policing, but how the tactics being used against the Stop Cop City and Defend the Atlanta Forest are the future of policing in kind of like a meta sense, like how the tactics that have been used against these activists so far will be trained into people at the Cop City if it gets built, and how they will be kind of amplified, right? Because if you the way that police are trained, right, they view anyone as a possible threat, then that means that there is an amplification in their training to see people like this. So how are the way that Cop City and Stop Cop City and Defend the Atlanta Forest people, activists, are painted, how is that going to get amplified inside of Cop City if it gets built, inside of these classes that they're going to take in there, right? I think it's a very interesting kind of thing to see happening in real time since I've become a journalist, how like the repression that social movements get are further trained into police. Because I mentioned, right, in 2020, a lot of police departments learned what it means to kind of engage in a little bit of urban warfare, which is why we saw a lot of police and security forces get bigger budgets the next year, because they supposedly needed the equipment and the weapons to deal with a possible repeat of the 2020 uprising, right? Kind of how
But
these.
then but then these, not to cut you off, but then these things, what's I think the most frustrating for people is that, we've seen the militarization of the police, but then when that militarization, we actually want people to use it, like during the Capitol uprising, right?
Yeah.
During the shooting in Uvalde, right? When, okay, you have all this stuff, go use it. It's almost like they're, like you're saying, they're buying this equipment and they're training with the idea in mind that it's going to be, let's be real, black and brown people in the streets setting stuff on fire that they're actually going to be deployed against. But then when it's, it's a school shooter,
Mm-hmm.
or when it's MAGA people storming the Capitol, it's almost like there's this hesitancy. And you see this all the time, right? When it's a black person or a Latino, they go in full force. But when it's a white person, they don't even get handcuffed, right? They get escorted to the
Yeah.
police station like they're a visiting dignitary, right? And when other, I mean, we've gone 45 minutes. The other thing I wanted to say is that it's troubling to inculcate and to put a sweeping brush on like everybody who's involved, because then journalists like you are being caught up in the mix, like you're saying,
Mm-hmm.
and across the Americas, the second most, the most dangerous job other than narco, right, is journalists, right? And then
Yeah.
the most dangerous is environmental activism, right? So if you're a journalist who is covering kind of your specialty, your main, one of your main areas of reporting is environmental activists, I mean, people like you are in harm's way, are in, not to put too fine a point on it, in the crosshairs. But and it's like environmental activists and journalists should not be, you know, seen as terrorists, and that's where we're at right now.
Yeah.
And it's not dissipating. You and I have seen that in the last couple of years. It's not dissipating. It's actually increasing, right? So I mean, just to wrap this up, I mean, where did the this week of action end? What are people feeling about the Stop Cop City movement? Where is it at?
Well, like I said, right, this was kind of a very chill week, comparatively, right, and I think that can be attributed to a multitude of factors. One of them being the fear of police repression. Another being that these activists are very tired, right? A lot of them have been doing this for years, and that stress, the stress of what they've been doing has been catching up to them. So I
I saw
think,
Matthew Johnson in that one video when he was explaining how this person's related. And then he's very well
yeah,
spoken, put together, the suit, everything. And at the end, he's like, I'm so sick of this shit. You know what I mean? And I felt that,
yeah,
I felt that.
right. So a lot of people are afraid of the police repression, kind of need the space to rest and recoup their energies. And then one thing I didn't really touch on at all is that there is currently a referendum proposition. If they get 70,000 signatures by August, the building of Cop City will be put up to a vote. And I think there is a kind of a divide between activists. Some see the referendum as kind of another arrow in the quiver for the movement, while others see it as kind of taking some energy away from the more direct action focus, the more building community of forest defenders, right? And it's a little bit of a divided line, but
Which always happens,
yeah,
right? I mean, in the end, in reality, it has to be a multi-pronged,
yeah.
movement, right? Some people working through democracy and voting and referendums, and other people taking direct action, right?
So the canvassing efforts really are beginning to ramp up. The last number that I heard for the week was that they've gotten about 5,000 signatures so far, and it has to be like a city of Atlanta resident that was scheduled or that had registered to vote, I believe, in 2021. So I mean that's a little bit hard to get, right? Especially from here to August, but they're kind of trying to put their best efforts in, and some, I think, a sizable portion of the energy in the movement is going towards this canvassing effort, right? And there have been already efforts today been efforts to kind of discredit this referendum. Today, during the press conference, Andrew Dickens said he doesn't believe the referendum will be successful, quote, if it is done honestly, according to George Cheedy, who does a lot of reporting on the movement for The Intercept, who's live tweeting the press conference, right? Kind of already sowing that seed of doubt in people who might not know better, that this referendum could possibly be quote unquote stolen, right? Kind of seeding this doubt from the beginning, while like a lot of the canvassers that I met were just kind of people who didn't want the police training facility in their city and for a forest to be cut down because of it. Right, but
Yeah.
the canvassing efforts they're going door to door. I saw a lot of events. There were like a couple canvassers at every event asking everybody that they could, are you a City of Atlanta resident? Are you registered to vote? Will you sign this petition? And if somebody didn't know about Cop City, which kind of happened a few times, I was kind of like getting lunch or anything or coffee. They would explain what Cop City is. They would explain the history, the tragic murder of Tortuguita, the domestic terrorism charges, the raid on the South River Music Festival. They would explain all of that, and they're really trying to put an earnest effort forward to get this referendum to the 70,000 votes it needs. So I think that's where a lot of the energy is going, right? I think there is not a sense of defeat, but it is like very clear to a lot of them that they don't occupy the forest anymore. There are plans for it to be reopened at some point. No actual date is given or has been given by the DeKalb County commissioners. That it's likely that it won't be open back up until 2024, and some activists see that as a delaying tactic.
Cooling the movement,
yeah.
putting the movement on ice, right?
Yeah, I mean,
and I think that's probably, I mean, that's probably so true what you said about people just want, I mean, they're not extremists,
yeah.
they're not leftists or anything. Like, I remember Orwell's quote in Homage to Catalonia, Orwell, who was a colonial police officer in Burma, he's like, I don't glorify workers or socialists or anarchists or anything like that, but when I see a worker in the street fighting his natural enemy, a police officer, I don't have to ask myself which side I'm on. And it's kind of like that. Like if it's between a police facility and a beautiful forest, the largest forest in an urban environment, the lungs of Atlanta, if it's between the lungs of Atlanta and a police training facility, most people are like, no, I want the forest, right? And it's not about even so much anti-cop, it's pro-forest, right?
Yeah, and that's, I think, because this forest was used by like people walking their dogs, by bikers,
right,
by motocross people, right? And I think that's having the movement be part environmentalist, part abolitionist, I think has been a big boon to the movement, because a lot of people join for the environmentalist side and then kind of get inducted into the abolitionist side, right? You get some people who started, I'm just here to protect the forest, way back in 2020 or 2021, and then in 2023 they're just like, the police are a fundamental enemy of mankind. You kind of see that progression because there's so many sides to this movement. Some people are like radical anarchists or communists, and some people are just like regular Atlantans who want to be able to walk in the forest without the sounds of gunshots ringing out pretty close to them, right?
And it goes back to, I know people are going to hate me for quoting Jefferson, but like, Jefferson said one of the, biggest threats to democracy is a standing army. And in his day, there were no police forces. I think the first police forces were like in the early 1800s in London, like professional police forces. And now, with, I don't know what Atlanta's PD's force is at. I know Chicago has a huge force. I know LAPD has a huge force.
That's like
New York. These are standing armies, right?
It's not just the Atlanta Police Department, right? A lot of the Georgia security forces are involved. The
state troopers,
the Cobb County Sheriff, Georgia Bureau of Investigation, Atlanta Police Department, and there is two more that I'm forgetting. Occasionally, you'll see security forces from other counties come in and do stuff with them, but it's not just It's not just Atlanta PD that is the kind of the security force. It's kind of a lot of the security forces in Georgia. And before we sign off, or I don't know if we're signing off, but I wanted to mention this because we're headed into an election year, right? Kind of noticeable how little faith a lot of these activists have in the democratic leadership of this city, right? In 2020, there was a giant grassroots canvassing movement to get Stacey Abrams elected, and that failed, right? And a lot of people who are still likely to vote Democrat that told me vote Democrat in 2024 told me that, yeah, you're probably not going to see this huge canvassing effort happen again in 2024 because they see how the Democratic leadership, like Andrew Dickens is a Democrat, a lot of the city council people are Democrats, have kind of turned their backs on these activists, asking for them to not build Stop Cop City, right? So I think that is going to play a very interesting part in Georgia and Atlanta elections in 2024, especially if they get to the 70,000 signatures, right? I think that's going to play a very, very interesting part in Georgia elections.
Yeah, I mean, I'm loath to tell the Democrats how to win an election, but if they're not for the working class, if they're not for immigrant rights, if they're not for environmental justice, what are they for, right? I mean, you know, but obviously you're going to be reporting on this now that you're back in Puerto Rico. Are you still doing that kind of summary of the whole thing?
Oh,
that'd be interesting.
Yeah. I'm writing a couple, right? Going through like I have about 100 pages of notes for the week, so I'm going through them. I'm writing up a couple of articles, and yeah, that should be out hopefully very soon.
I saw
but yeah,
Priscilla Luna. I was just on here. I think she left, but you know, she uses her platform for activism, and she said, you know, thank you for sharing this platform to talk about Cop City. You're also gonna probably host, hopefully, you know, this is early days, right? But host some activists on Latino Rebels Radio.
Yeah.
All this is to say that, you know, stay tuned at Latino Rebels. We are covering Cop City and environmental justice. There's also hopefully let's not give away too much, but you know, you might be also traveling the world to cover similar movements, right? It's the same
hopefully,
thing, different place.
Before there were some environmental activists from other places, other countries in South America up there, kind of connecting with this movement. And one thing that has been very interesting to see is kind of how Cop City is both a very local movement, because there are Atlantans who don't know what Cop City is, but it is a very national or an international movement. I think it was either yesterday or the day before, I think a couple of environmental defenders blocked access to a logging route in Oregon, and there was another one in, I believe it was California, but don't quote me on that.
I saw something in Argentina like a couple of days ago where there's like activists down there lined up, and there's a line of police, and it's the same battle, right?
No. I mean, like, specifically, like, the two actions that I mentioned were, like, specifically in solidarity with Cop City. Like, they were holding Stop Cop City banners, right? It's very interesting to see how these are this kind of national. And during the week, there were talks by environmental activists in France, in Germany, who had been fighting their own environmental battles, and were saying, like, Stop Cop City. This is, like you're saying, this is Stop Cop City is one facet of the fight for the environment the world over, right? And I think it is growing in notoriety, but in popularity across the United States.
The environment and democracy, right? Those are it's kind of like Boom, it clicks. Thank you so much, Los. I know we were supposed to have you on
No,
Friday,
it's
then
all good.
Monday, but I think this was a perfect, now you're back. And I can't wait to see what reporting you do out of your visit, out of your embedding with the activists down there. I'll talk to you later, man.
See ya. Have a good day.
Stay safe.
See ya.
Peace.